right, we're flowing. We're live.
All right.
All right. Anna Djokovic.
Yes.
No relation to the notorious and now my favorite tennis player.
Oh, well, now he's your favorite.
Oh, you know, I was pretty.
We've been friends for this long, and now he's your favorite.
Well, I've been indifferent to tennis before this.
Okay.
And
right.
to be honest, I still kind of am. But I love the the character of Djokovic.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a G in my books.
Well, I think we might be related, but then you see me play tennis, and you're like, man, nah, definitely not.
Actually, what do you know what the disposition is towards him, like back in the motherland? Because I know how he was presented here, like especially in the media. What's the outlook on him back in Serbia?
I think because he's done such incredible charity work for Serbia, like for heaps of organizations, he's really helped the country out. So on the whole, they back him. Yeah, whatever he does, they'll support him. He's been so influential for Serbia, and he's brought awareness to our country as well. And people can say my surname now, which is fantastic for me. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, now that's like it's always interesting to know what the other side of the argument is, especially when it's such a hot button issue that it was in the media. Cool. Tell me about your path. So you told me about you doing a master's in human resources.
Yeah. But
from what I understood, from my perception of what human resources are, it just doesn't sound like human resources,
Yeah. Nobody likes human resources, let's be honest. We're always involved in the problems, right?
Yeah.
So I completed a master's in human resources, which was focused on looking at a problem in the workplace. And at the time I was working for a veterinarian company in the HR role, and found out that there were very high suicide rates of veterinarians. And so my master's topic was around finding an intervention that could help increase well-being for veterinarians.
So actually, what was the outcome? So, because I can understand the research would have been, it would have been quite grim, but at the same time, it would have been interesting. But what's the outcome? What was implemented? What measures were taken? Yeah.
So it was mixed methods. So I did a lot of interviews. I did interviews at the start, at the end, and in 3 months' time to see whether the intervention, the tools that they learned from it were being implemented. And it was on the idea of mindfulness. And why I did mindfulness was because I wanted to understand on an academic level what mindfulness meant.
Can you explain to me what mindfulness is? Because I get it a lot that I should be mindful of things. People tell me quite often, but to be honest, I don't know what mindfulness means. To me, I'm kind of my mind is already full of different shit. So
mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment, and a lot of it is around accepting how you're feeling and what you're thinking at the moment, and just letting it be, so that you can be in the present moment. So when we think a lot about the future, it's associated with feelings of anxiety. And when we think about the past, it's a lot about a lot of feelings of melancholy and depression. So if you can take a break from either thinking too far ahead or too much in the past, it can give you a sense of, it can help you to relax and realize that life is about the present moment. You can't control so much in the future, and you can't do too much about what's happened in the past. So you can learn techniques to help you refocus on the present moment. It is a struggle. We're not wired to be mindful.
No, I mean, it sounds like it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, but I mean, it's definitely easier said than done.
Yes.
So, how do you do it?
It's not something that comes naturally. It takes a lot of practice. The whole Buddhist philosophy, monks dedicate their lives to practicing mindfulness. So if you've ever tried it and you've found it difficult, that's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be hard. It's not meant to be that you sit and you are capable of just sitting still and clearing your mind. No one is capable of that.
I mean, to an extent, because I've, over the last little while, I've become a bit more in touch with that because,
Yeah.
lockdown's been tough on a lot of us. And, I found that on me, it's been very stressful. So I don't even know how I came to it. I just kind of decided, okay, I'll give this a go. I don't know what else to do. I've tried a million different things, so I'll go and just meditate. I've done it in different places. I've gone to the bush, to the waterfalls, etc. And it has helped. But the thing is, in my mind, like I haven't figured out like any particular technique.
Yeah.
So like to me, it's kind of, it's still this almost like an accident that you stumble upon. It's like, oh, it works. I don't know how I did it, but
Yeah.
it kind of works. So, like was there anything that you come up with as part of your research that kind of led to something specific or?
Specific techniques or?
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
mean, like, okay, you figured out that, they have a problem. The
Yeah.
solution could be that, could be mindfulness. But how do you implement that? I mean, it's not just telling them like, okay, yeah, you need
Yeah.
to be more mindful. How
No.
do you get them to be mindful?
So mindfulness and meditation often get lumped together. Mindfulness is about being present and noticing your thoughts and accepting your thoughts and just being with them. If you choose to do that through meditation, that is one avenue. And if you choose to do that by going for a walk and noticing, paying attention to, say you're on the beach, paying attention to the feeling of the sand, to the sound of the waves, that gives you a break from the constant thoughts in your head. So mindfulness helps to alleviate some of the pressures going on in your mind, but it's not a state that you can constantly be in. It's not, unless you are going for being a monk, who they dedicate their whole lives to having that as their default.
It'll be hard to do all day.
Yeah.
But in terms of that as well, you see, for me, from my perspective, it was meditation didn't quite do it.
Yeah.
Meditation was more of it's almost like training for it.
Yeah.
It's just like as a result of meditation, I was able to find myself being a bit more mindful in certain areas of my life because I wasn't kind of dealing with it all at that time when I'm meditating, I'm here, I'm like, it's all good. But then I had to go back to the real world and still face certain challenges. But how I perceive them, how I react to them is a different thing. So I felt that through meditation, there were certain things that I realized about myself that I'm like, okay, I need to do this to handle these situations better. So I mean that's as far as I got on that level. So was there any kind of techniques that perhaps?
Yeah, that they learn. And so through the course, I had to do the 8-week program before I was kind of given the go-ahead to research it. So I participated, and you learn different techniques such as breathing techniques, walking meditations. Those are the two key things, but a huge part of the program is actually sharing what's going on for you as you try those techniques out. So if you've ever tried meditating where you sit and you listen to a guided meditation, you will notice your mind starts wandering, right? At first 10 seconds, you're like, cool, I'm enjoying this. This is calming music. And then you're like, someone's mowing the lawn outside. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this meditation's really long. And then you're like, oh, my knee is itchy, but the meditation's telling me to just sit still. And what mindfulness is, okay, my thoughts are going all over the place. Yeah? Okay, let's take a deep breath and let's focus on the present moment. How am I feeling? What can I hear? Great, I can hear the lawnmower. I can hear the guided meditation. My knee is itchy. Okay, that's okay. Let's let those thoughts go now, and let's just focus on the breath for 5 breaths. And then you'll notice again your mind starts wandering and you're like, this is stupid. Why am I focusing on breaths? I've got so much work to do. And and then one day you'll be able to focus on 10 breaths and then 15 breaths. So it's not about sitting down, listening to a guided meditation and being, 10 minutes later being like, yeah, that was amazing, my life has changed. No, it's just noticing that as you practice, you get better and better at realizing what's going on inside you, so that when you're confronted with something in your life, you can create a space between you and the thing that's happening, and you can choose how you react because you're aware of what's going on within you because you've practiced that self-awareness and you've accepted yourself. You're like, okay, Anna, you did really badly today, you only focused on the lawnmower, but you just accept that that's what happened and you try again.
So in that sense, you're kind of saying that essentially you're practicing it through meditation, but you're able to apply that in everyday life. So for example, like even if we don't take vets, for example, we take any job, a manager came down,
Yes.
said some shit, and you just you're infuriated,
Yes.
life sucks for you right now. And you kind of applying that technique to kind of deal with that moment. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So what you realize is that you can't control the environment. All you can control in life is yourself and how you react. So with mindfulness, if your manager comes down and you're just enraged, they've said something to you, they've given credit to someone else, or they've taken the credit for something you've done or something like that, what mindfulness can do is you'll realize, okay, I know when I'm angry, it's helpful to take a deep breath. So you take a deep breath and you're like, oh, wow, I can feel I'm tense. I can feel the surge within me. So let's just take a moment to let that pass and then speak to your manager. And then you have control over the situation because you can't choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you react.
This is interesting. I feel like I've just gone through a little meditation with you right now. That's cool. No, okay. So in terms of that, like obviously, it makes sense on on that level. But in terms of say, take vets for example.
Yeah.
So how was that implemented? Was there like,
So,
do we take a break in the middle of the day to do this, or?
Oh, it was 2.5 hours after work that they dedicated. Every Tuesday they went from 6 to 8:30, and it was 10 vets, and they worked together as a team with a psychologist facilitating. They would do some mindfulness activities, but to be honest with you, a lot of the vets didn't practice outside of those 2.5 hours. So
Yeah.
I'm not here
that.
preaching that mindfulness is the solution, but what it did do was it allowed them. So, the guided aspect was really helpful in having a psychologist there equipped to deal with whatever came up, given that their profession has the suicidality in it, was really helpful, and it helped them.
Sorry, you said that like they vets actually have the highest suicide rate. Is
Yeah,
that right?
proportionately, they have the highest suicide rate of all professions. And the first thing that people say are, what about dentists? What about doctors? It's a weird competition.
I don't know about dentists because it's like, well,
Dentists,
yeah, but I mean, with
That's what I often
can
get.
imagine with doctors. For some
Yeah.
reason, to me, like I thought it'd be, say like, what do you call the doctors that deal with children?
Pediatricians.
Pediatricians.
Yeah.
So pediatricians, I thought that it might be them because I mean, obviously, I can imagine something like that would be quite heavy.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. If we compare veterinarians to doctors, so human health, it's a very competitive degree to get into. It takes a very long time to become a specialist, and then you go out into the world and you're expected it's life and death stuff. As a veterinarian, it's also very competitive to get into, and it's a long degree and it takes a while to specialize. And you're also dealing with a whole bunch of different species, not just humans. And then you go out into the real world and you're limited by what the client can afford. Whereas as a doctor, you've got government subsidies, you've got everything backing you to save that life. As a vet, you're limited by what the client can afford. And as the client, it's the first time we are faced with the true cost of medicine.
That's interesting. I never, like, that kind of lit up in my head just now because I never thought of that, because as people, it's kind of like, well, okay, we need to save a life.
Yeah.
I mean, like obviously we have different aspects to, like health insurance, etc. But still, it's not like they're going to say, oh, well, he's got no insurance, too bad. Like, he's going to have to die. With animals, it's, it is different. It's kind of like, well, look, I can't afford it. And they literally say like, okay, sorry about it.
Euthanasia is about $65 on average, but a surgery to repair the broken leg can be thousands of dollars because you're paying for everything, the bandage, the antiseptic wipe, the everything. Nothing is subsidized in veterinary care. But for human health, it's heavy, like it's subsidized, it's free for us, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's free, or if it's not, it's kind of like, I suppose with the vets, it sounds like it's almost like doing private procedures,
Yeah.
like, private medical procedures on humans, but paying for it all out of your own pocket. No insurance, no government subsidy. Like, it's as expensive as, and I know how expensive it can be. Like, I remember I used my health insurance to get my tonsils taken out. I looked at the bill and it was like $6,500. I'm like, fuck, it was just tonsils, man. Like, yeah. But like that's how much it costs. So I mean, I can imagine that, in terms of that, anything that happens to an animal, it'll be a similar cost, but I suppose the approach is different from the financial side of things.
Yeah. And when you go to work, you want to do your best, right? Work really impacts your self-esteem. Like, we've all had a good day at work and we come home and we're pumped. So imagine going to work and not being able to do your best because you're limited by what someone can afford. So you can save their dog. You know everything. You have trained for years, but they can't afford it. You have to put it down.
Oh man,
so over time, terrible. It's those experiences as well as the normalization of death. So vets are euthanizing animals every day. It's not once a month. It's a common part of the job. It's not the euthanasia itself, though. Much like humans, how we've had the bill passed, euthanasia is helpful to help relieve something of its stress and misery, So if an animal is in a lot of pain, euthanasia is an appropriate treatment. So it's not that euthanasia is bad. It's when you can save a life, but euthanasia is the only option. That's when it's a bit testing for someone who's completely trained to save a life, but is limited in that way. And so, but then euthanasia becomes a normal part of their day, and death is, it's just a bit more normalized than for you and me working behind a computer. No one's dying, especially in HR. Yeah. So because it's normal, then suddenly it's not such a scary option to walk over to the shelf, to grab a bit of pentabarb, to take it home. You're having a bad day. You have that thought. You know how to do it. You know how to administer it. You know it will be painless. You know you'll fall asleep. You know it will work. You don't have to second guess. And suddenly that one bad day turns into a lifelong consequence. Or
shit. That was a very detailed walkthrough. Okay, well, I suppose in terms of that, it's a very helpful project that you did. And to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that no one's done it before. Has anybody tried to do anything like this before?
There have been a few studies in the States, but no one has looked at vets going through it like this, and definitely not in New Zealand. There have been some mindfulness studies on veterinary students, but not practicing vets. So not once they were already out in the field.
Well, I mean, it'll make a huge difference between somebody that's just
students,
kind of studying
you're still
versus somebody that's been in the game, and that's pretty intense.
So mindfulness wasn't the panacea. It wasn't the solution. It wasn't what's going to save the industry. But what was helpful about this whole intervention was it was the first time that these vets were able to talk about their experiences in a controlled environment with a facilitator, and they were able to share. It was the first time they heard from each other, and that normalized their experiences. And normalizing an experience is really powerful, because when you think you're the only person experiencing it, it can be very isolating. But when you hear someone else has gone through something similar, it can be really helpful, because then you can learn from one another. And if you're too nervous to share, you can listen to them.
It makes sense. And I feel like, there's a big movement around mental health right now. You see it in a lot of places, social media. You see I Am Hope. For all the brothers, by the way, I'm going to interview one of the boys from there.
Awesome.
So we got an episode coming up there. But, that's actually with, so for example, for all the brothers, it's, mental health, I'd say you could call it a mental health group for men. And it's, it's not done on any official level. It's just kind of you know, a bunch of guys got together and made it.
Yeah.
But, you know, like I've actually, you know, witnessed it firsthand. I've went and, you know, saw the guys, I hung out with them, and it's, you know, like it actually does make quite a bit of a difference, you know, like that kind of approach, because it's exactly the kind of approach that they take. It's just like, well, you know, let's get a bunch of guys together, just share some, you know, some pits and peaks, so to speak, and you know, and you know, I myself came through, you know, with everything that I got, you know, like I'm just like everybody else. I got all my shit to deal with, and you know, like it does feel really like liberating in that sense, where you kind of just show up, you talked about it, and you're not like, you know, it doesn't feel weird. It doesn't feel like these, you know, like these things you see in the movies of some like group therapy where everybody sits in the circle
clapping and
you know, like that scene from Bad Boys 2. But you know, in terms of that, it's just like it does help, and it kind of makes you feel like, you know, you're not so weird after all. Yeah.
We're all on a weird spectrum of weird, let's be honest.
Especially in modern society, I think.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think at least we're kind of becoming a bit more aware of that too, that it's not, you know, before that it used to be something that wasn't normal.
Yeah.
You know, normal, well, you know, like, I mean, I don't think anybody knew what normal was, but it was just, you know, certain things like, just don't bring it up in your normal kind of thing.
Yeah, the perception.
Yeah.
One thing that really stood out for me in my study was that mental health is not the absence of mental illness. So just because you do not have a diagnosis, or just because you do not have a mental illness, does not mean you are mentally well or healthy. So if you think of
it definitely makes sense, because, you know,
so you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait to be diagnosed with depression or anxiety for you to not be in a good for you to seek help, or to go to a group like that and participate. So you don't have to wait, you know, for it to, if you think of a continuum from -10 to +10, and if we look at from 0 to negative, if you think about kind of abnormal psychology, so things like psychosis and things that are additional to the normal, or maybe things that deplete from the normal, like severe depression. So you don't have to wait to get into the negative. If you are from 0 to 10, if you are somewhere, you know, between 0 and 5, you're still worthy of talking about your mental health. So you don't have to justify it with a mental illness. Just because you may not have a mental illness does not mean you are mentally healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, like all of these kind of things are subjective as well, because, you know, you don't, how do you diagnose someone with depression? I mean, cool, like, you know, they're sad all the time. Okay, that could be diagnosed as depression, but then a lot of people just feel shit sometimes. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be diagnosed with, you know, some sort of chronic depression or anything like that. But at that time, that's how you feel. Yeah. And if you don't kind of address that, you know, that can still create a bit of consequence to you. I suppose it's just like any kind of way of being sick. You know, you have your kind of chronic illnesses, you know, you have conditions that will last you a lifetime.
Yes.
And then you just have your occasional flus, which will still fuck you up just as bad, like, but you're going to get over it.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, you still have to pay attention to while you got it.
Yes,
because,
that's so true.
Flu still kills people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a really good analogy.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if you put it in those terms, it's a lot easier to kind of perceive, because, you know, people look at it as just, you know, sometimes it used to be looked at as, you know, like mental health wasn't real health. It's all in your head. It's not like, you know, like if you're sick physically,
it's hard to understand because you can't see
it's
it.
there, and if you're not, you're not. Whereas in mental, it's kind of like, well, how do you manifest it? You know, how do you treat it? You know, you take Robitussin or what? Like,
not too much.
So, you know, like, in terms of that, it makes sense. Well, okay, in terms of that, how did it? You know, I'm interested in the work that you do with refugees. How did one kind of lead to the other? Like, is there any connection between the two, or was this just something that took place totally separate from that?
It's hard to understand my journey. I haven't had a linear progression in the things that I've attempted and achieved. You know, started off going to university, then completed a degree, then worked, then did a bit of postgraduate study, and then went on and started a social enterprise to support former refugees in New Zealand. But at the heart of all of my journey is people. So that is my main focus, supporting people.
Yeah, well, I suppose now human resource management. Yeah. You got to kind of pick the words out. It's not just HR. It's human resource.
People and culture.
Yeah. No, okay. So, but yeah, how did that idea come up?
So about 4 years ago, I saw my friend supporting an organization on her social media. She was doing the social media for the Bread and Butter Project in Sydney. And they are a wholesale bakery, and they employ former refugees and they train them up in baking, and then they place them in the different stores that they own. And I was like, wow, this is such a great way to support people to integrate into a new society and to really capitalize on their skill set and their capability and recognize that they can contribute, because people want to contribute. We all want to, like I said before, we all want to do a good job. So I went over there and I baked with them for the week, and I met the team, and I was like, this is such a great idea. Do they want to bring it to New Zealand? They didn't want to. They want to expand in Australia. So I was like, how could... So, of course, we're not exactly the same in countries. So how could something like that work here? And that's sort of how it started. So the Bread Collective the purpose is to support former refugees into employment through baking bread. Why bread? Because bread is at the heart.
How to bake, that's why.
I mean, yeah, I suppose that does help.
Yeah, well, I mean, what was the show called?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
You're famous.
We don't need to go
you were
there.
on TV. What was it called?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was it? The Bake Off?
Don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. What is it? I can't remember. Come on, remind me.
The Great Kiwi Bake Off.
The Great Kiwi Bake Off. That's
and
the
boy,
one.
was that nowhere to go out with a bang, like burning
matter,
a cake.
But you still, you were still on it. It's still a cool experience to have. And, I can attest for the fact that her baking is the bomb. Like, honestly, she got skills. But yeah, in terms of that, so obviously, you took something that, like a skill set that you have.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's, obviously you do your kind of day job, so to speak, still in like, to do with human resources and stuff. So this is more of like, I'd call it a passion thing, and you put it to good use. Like, you actually used it to do something positive, which is really cool. But yeah, so how did you go about organizing this? So like, how do you actually go out and say, hey, give me some refugees, I'll do something cool with them,
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's hard to start something, and sometimes people are limited by the start. They're waiting for something to happen for them to catapult into something new. But for me, what happened was, through my master's, through a paper that all master's students have to do, an ethics paper, I happened to sit next to a senior lecturer of patisserie at AUT. I got talking to him. I told him about my idea, and he was like, I think AUT can help you. And that's how it started. So, it's about being ready for the opportunity. So I had done a whole bunch of research prior to that. It took a year to get seated next to this person, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I went to Sydney. I worked with them. I found out about the project there. I came back here. I started researching the refugee journey and all of that, and how I've done countless business plans. It took a lot of time to be prepared to be able to talk to that senior lecturer about my idea.
Yeah, I mean, like, to kind of take your idea and actually pitch it for execution. Yeah, no, I can definitely understand that. And I mean, it's cool that you actually went there and looked at their at their setup. It's it's really cool that you actually kind of committed to researching it to that extent.
Yeah.
So what, like, in terms of the journey of the people involved, what happened? So I mean, obviously, okay, the refugees that came to New Zealand, they're now here. How do you get them into your program? What did they do, and where did they ultimately end up?
Right.
What's the full journey here?
So the entry into the program is simply that you are from a former refugee background and that you would like to work as a baker. And that was it. So that was the criteria to join the program. And then I did interviews with each of the students to get to know them, to make sure it's a vulnerable group of people. So you have to do your due diligence. You have to make sure that they understand what's expected of them and that they do want to go on this journey with me. So we did interviews with each one, had interpreters there for the interviews to again make sure they understood and that they did want to do this, because I wouldn't want to put them in a situation, again, where they don't want to be in.
Yeah.
And then from there, because this is the pilot, I told them that they'll be co-designing it with me. So I had an outline and a framework, and then together we've co-created this program now. So we've got our final week next week, and it's because of these wonderful students that now I have a solid program that I can administer to the next group. So it's with their support.
How long is the program?
It's 6 weeks, and I chose 6 weeks because 6 weeks is a good amount of time to develop a new habit, to wake up, to go to a program each day, to have a routine. Yeah. So it's a 6-week program. It's 4 days per week, and it's 4 hours of baking each day.
Nice. So
and
once it finishes, where to from there?
So the program is taught by employers alongside myself. So I've got an agreement with Countdown and Wild Wheat. So for this pilot program, I would love to expand the employers in future, but these two kindly signed up to do a test with me. They supplied their bakers. So week 1 was all dedicated to laying the foundation. So we had a psychologist come in and we ran a workshop on some of the barriers that the students have faced integrating into New Zealand. We did a workshop on employment law and employment rights and went through an employment agreement. And then only in the second week did we actually start baking. And that was, one baker from Countdown came, and the whole week he taught, and I supported him to teach. And that's one way of building a professional network, right?
Yeah,
it's one of
it
them.
almost sounds like an apprenticeship of sorts.
Yeah.
Where you're not just kind of like learning and then like, okay, you've learned something, off you go. Like you actually kind of, first of all, you're learning from people that are doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And you are developing a connection. So, like in that sense, it's like once it's all done, you kind of have, you have a door to walk through should you choose to do it. Yeah.
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 Yeah. It builds that network, and then they've been going on placements in those in the same bakeries that those bakers are from. So we had someone teach us in week 2, and then I've been sending the students there to work for a 6-hour shift with that baker. So it's building that network and familiarity, because professional networks are the key to getting employment these days, right? Yeah. And so it's exposing them to a variety of people, a variety of methods. It's not just the same method. Yeah, so it's about building professional networks, about building friendships, that whole support network that they've lost by coming here, because they're not often with their whole family.
Yeah.
Most of them are here just with their children, and sometimes one of the students came here alone. Her baby was 5 months, and she was only able to reunite when they were 5 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So their journeys are all individual, all very unique. And it's not about focusing on their journey. I just want to focus on the next chapter.
Oh, yeah, kind of, allowing them to integrate themselves into where they are. That's really cool. Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I think it also kind of, I think from my perspective, especially, because I know there's a bit of a sentiment around some of the, the more, shall we call them, conservative people that are like, they say stuff like, these refugees, why we're letting them in, are just going to come here and, be on the benefit and stuff like that. And, they're taking our money, all that kind of shit. So it's like, it's really cool. I think, it shows that, like, this is not what it's about. These people want to be here. Yeah. They've escaped from a bad place, but at the same time, they're here, they're earning their place in society just like everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, the group is made up of people who were doctors where they were from, and with all the way to people who've never gone to school at all. It's just a whole variety. So to just group them as one category is doing them a huge disservice. They're just people who've had to flee due to persecution. So to be a refugee, you've had to flee. Most commonly it's due to war, but it can be things like being homosexual in a country where it's illegal to be homosexual. So it's any kind of fear of persecution, any fear for your safety in that country. So yeah, it's hard to just, that word refugee can sometimes, some of the students don't want to be associated with that word because it immediately puts, stereotypes them.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, that's just how people are, everything's a buzzword or a trigger word.
Yeah.
That being said, it's interesting you say that, a lot of people have these, contrasting experiences when they come here.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us, if anything that you've heard, from these people, what their experiences were actually like, and what's, is there any kind of pattern as to what countries you get students from, or?
The unique thing about refugees is that every decade or so they change where they're from.
Yeah. No, I get that.
Yeah. When we immigrated here from Yugoslavia, a lot of the refugees were from Yugoslavia, trying to escape the wars we were having. But now a lot of the refugees are from Afghanistan, given what's happening there. New Zealand has taken about 700 of those people who were stuck in Afghanistan, have taken them here. But if you think about it, 700 compared to a population of 5 million, as Jacinda reminds us.
Team of 5 million.
Team of 5 million.
When you think about it this
people,
way, 700 people's fuck all, and especially, especially when they come through and do stuff like this, that's 700 productive people here, so again, it just kind of makes you think, there's a lot of people that don't like refugees for that reason, but I think it's just a very bad misconception in terms of that. Because
think about it, would you want to leave everything you had? Would you want to leave the society you're familiar with, your family, your whole profession that you've worked years to build, all those networks? Would you want to leave that suddenly overnight? No one wants to be a refugee.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that, it must be so...
They're not exploiting
so good
the system.
Here compared to there, that everyone just wants to run away from...
They don't choose New Zealand. The UN places them.
Yeah.
They go to a refugee camp and then they come through a quota system, and certain countries have signed up to take on refugees. New Zealand has signed up to 1,500 per year, but we don't meet that quota each year. We're not necessarily admitting 1,500 new people into the country each year. That's just the maximum we've signed up for. And the UN decides where you go. So these people haven't chosen New Zealand either.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being told where to live like that?
Yeah, and especially New Zealand, especially, if you look at a country like Afghanistan, it's not exactly like you can walk here.
Yeah, no.
It's not I want to go there. Yeah. It's this is a country on the other end of the earth. You got to travel some distance.
Yeah.
In terms of, so now that they're here, can you see much of a culture shock for them? Because obviously, these would be some very different cultures, which, you and I, we're both immigrants at some point in our lives. So, we've both had to experience quite a radical kind of culture change, and a culture shock that comes with it. Obviously, it affects people differently at different ages. You and I were both quite young when we came here.
Yeah.
What do you see? Do you see anything in terms of that? Because I feel like you would. I feel like you'd see, how people deal with being in this new environment. If you've come from, a country with a radically different culture and now you're here. Yeah. What do you see?
From the research that I've done, one of the key terms that I read about was slowly. So it takes time to get used to a new culture. So it may be that once they arrive, it takes a few years to just have the confidence to even get out there and do a program like this. We can't expect someone who's just gone through something very traumatic, is now in a new country, to immediately hit the ground running, So this whole aspect of slowly has really stood out for me. And that period is very different for each person. So some of the students have been here 2 years, but some have been here 8 years, and they still haven't been able to find employment for whatever reason. It's most likely due to a knock in confidence, being declined so many times, not being confident with the English language, because it's a difficult language. It really is. So the program has also incorporated things like at-home English language tutoring for the students that lasts for the duration of the program and 6 weeks after, when they're hopefully placed into employment. And just those kind of considerations. The program has lunch provided for them, transport to get to the program, clothing, not uniforms, but clothing they can just wear, safe shoes, backpacks, phones and laptops. Everything you need to be a functioning member of society. Yes, you don't need a phone or a laptop to bake, but you do need a phone to call me to let me know you're not going to make it, and you do need a laptop to apply for your job.
Yeah. In terms of, have you heard any like crazy stories of any sort? Like, I feel like, we all have crazy stories when it comes to being an immigrant in general, and I feel like especially as a refugee, it will be even more so intense. So, like, have you heard anything that I don't know, from a perspective of a person that obviously lives in New Zealand, that you found quite like, wow, like, eye-opening?
Just the amount, I guess I won't go into specifics in case it somehow identifies people, but just the amount of sacrifice, whether you have chosen New Zealand for a better future or whether you've come as a refugee, the amount of sacrifice it takes to make that move is huge. So what your parents would have given up to come here, what mine gave up, it's a big change, and we reap the benefits because we are in a more stable country. But it's those sacrifices that you don't hear about when you meet the students. They won't immediately give you their life story,
Yeah, no, for sure. And not,
so it's really hard. You always have to keep in mind, no matter who it is, no matter who you meet, you have to keep in mind that they have a life journey to get them here and that you don't know it. So you have to keep in mind that there's loads of stuff behind a person.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No. In terms of the whole culture shock, because how long have you been here now? You've been here for a while.
Over 25 years.
Over 25 years, yeah. So, like, you obviously, like, you've kind of integrated yourself quite well into, New Zealand culture. Like, just as I have too, but, do you remember what that experience was like for you at the time? I remember like seeing what was happening at home, which is my parents like struggling in New Zealand and me not understanding what was happening. I didn't speak English when I came here. I got thrown into school, but as a kid, you're confident. That is a hell of an experience.
Yeah.
Like, because that was the same. It was the same thing with me. Like, I knew yes and no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew yes and no. And and the thing is, when you show up first, like, people always want to ask you shit too. Yeah. Especially, as a kid, there's all these like other curious kids around you, like you're from some culture they've never experienced before. So they keep asking you shit and you're just like, yes. And at a certain point, everybody starts laughing. And I'm like, what the fuck did I just say yes to?
Yeah.
Like, that was, that's my experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad we moved here. I'm really glad. New Zealand is a wonderful country. But it wasn't easy for my parents. For me, it's hard to know. I feel like, and you might feel the same, there's like this generation of immigrant children who've had the initial part of their life in one culture and then grown up in another one, and you don't quite fit in either.
No, I can relate to that.
It's like a third.
A lot, yeah. Like, because like, let's put it simply, right? Like, I went to a school where I just kind of like, my school was very, I don't want to make it sound like, like it was some sort of prison or anything like that, but, like it was, it had its kind of dominant cultures, it had its minorities, and I just found that, like, I didn't fit into anything at all. Like, like I've had this weird, like, hybrid culture, which was, on one hand, I'm Russian, which is totally different to anything else that was around me. But at the same time, I was influenced by certain other cultures. Like, I grew up with hip hop.
Yeah.
So, to me, that was me. That's what I knew. It wasn't weird to me because here in Russia, like, I never got that whole dynamic that I suppose was, is a bit more known in the Western culture, especially, like with how in touch everybody is with, like, what's going on in America and whatnot, where, they have this whole, like, black and white dynamic. To me, that wasn't a thing. To me, hip hop was hip hop. If you like it, you like it, let's just, let's just all enjoy the shit. But, like, when I brought that over here, that wasn't very well received.
Right. You were the Eminem.
Well, yeah, like, you're some white boy trying to, get into hip hop, like, fuck off, do something else. So, like that's kind of what I experienced when I first came here. And, like it was tough, so like the way I'm describing it is a very kind of, lightly put, like,
yes, an easy to understand example.
Yeah, like things were pretty shit at the time, to say the least. But it's interesting because, eventually you figure out how to, like, navigate that.
Yeah.
And you still end up being this weird hybrid that I am now, like, where I feel like in the end, I actually managed to learn to relate to just about everyone, like I went to Maslin College. What's up? And like I literally learned how to relate to every culture that we have in New Zealand. Any kind of majority culture anyway. Obviously we have some minorities that that are just not represented to the extent where you kind of come in contact with them quite often. But in that sense, it's quite interesting how, like, what kind of personality what kind of identity you can develop in a setting like that.
But we're still going through that now, right? So to expect, former refugees they're going to take as long, like 25 years later, and I'm still trying to figure out where exactly I fit. Of course, I'm comfortable with who I am, but, when I go back home, I don't fit in there, and I'm slightly off here. So similar with them, they're just going to have to take their time. But meanwhile, it's work. Employment in New Zealand is a key way to integrate into society, and it's a great way to meet new people and to learn about the culture through working. So it's just one tool, and it will help them to earn money and just support that integration process. But it's not a matter of they get a job and then suddenly they feel like New Zealand's home or something like that. But it's a good way to integrate, because there's also assimilation, which is where you just lose your culture and take on the new one, and that's not
I've seen that happen.
That's not an easy route.
Nah, but I've seen that happen though. Like, in fact, for somebody that's been here for as long as I have, I've known, like, other Russian kids that have come here at the same age. And if you were to meet them now, you wouldn't even know they were Russian.
Yeah.
So, like, and I don't know. To me, it seems a little bit strange. Not in a way of, like, like in they're weirdos, but just in a way of, like, it's like I feel like they still, in my eyes anyway, they don't feel like they're kind of complete in that sense. Like, you can kind of sense it from them. Where on one hand, like, you're just kind of another Kiwi, so to speak, but it's just like some of these things you can see that there's still, like, a little disparity between them and other, some other kid that's just born here, been here, and hasn't been anywhere else.
It's hard. This is why talking about it is helpful, so that they understand that route that they took is a common route that people take. But if they do feel like something is missing, perhaps they can have the confidence to revisit their original, heritage and see what that does for them. But so there are kind of three options when someone moves to a country. It's either you reject the host country, so you just reject New Zealand and stick to your own. You integrate, where you can have a bit of both, or you assimilate, where you reject your original and you take on the new one.
Yeah, I mean, all three happen.
Happen, yeah.
You see it all the time. I don't think one is more rare than the other in that sense even.
It's just integration is probably the easiest of, the easiest for your well-being.
Well, yeah, it's easiest for your mind to kind of take on. It's kind of like you still, you're not dismissing your whole history. You're not dismissing your past and your identity that you've kind of created for yourself already, and trying to fully reinvent yourself, because that can be a pretty tough experience for someone. But at the same time, you're like, well, this is where I'm at now, and this is what I'm working with. So I bring my experiences and I do the best that I can with what I have now.
Yeah.
But it's, what the other interesting thing you mentioned is, I think a lot of people don't quite realize the immigrant experience, especially like, you mentioned, like you got all these doctors and scientists and whatnot, because I think that's one thing that gets overlooked, especially with the way the immigration policies are set up, because quite often a lot of the immigrants, especially these days, they come over as, because we need them, because as an economy we need them, like let's give us your smart, skilled people and stuff like that. But the thing is, when it comes to being smart and skilled, we seem to recognize different countries as differently kind of as having different value for that skill and knowledge, and it's interesting you say that. It's like, well, what does an Afghan doctor not know that a doctor from, I don't know, from the UK or something like that knows, and I've experienced that same thing through my parents as well, so both of my parents have like my father has two degrees, he's got a degree in engineering and in law. I mean, I can see how potentially law could be, one of those subjects where it's kind of like, it could be somewhat like region specific. But in terms of being an engineer, that was a tough one. Like he had to work quite hard to prove that he actually knows some shit. Like he actually had to show somebody to kind of be like, okay, you know what, I'll take the chance on you because you've actually shown that to me. Whether someone else can just walk in with a paper and say, well, look, you already know what I'm about. Yeah.
You recognize this qualification, and I get the pick, therefore.
Yeah, and I mean, in that sense, I can see how, like my parents' experience would have been quite a hard one at the time, because they, it's not like they were that young, they were like, like my father, for example, was already 40 years old when we moved here. And, for him, like, that was just, that's it. Like he had to take, minimum wage job for that, for that little while that, we were here. Like we had fuck all. Like we slept on the floor for like the first few months, like, so it took a while to readjust and quite a bit of work. Like for him, it was that. For my mother, like she had to go and do extra study, to actually, she worked at Pack and Save as well. And it was ironic because, 5 years later, I was working at the very same, like that was my first job, same Pack and Save, doing the very same job that she was doing. So, like it's quite a paradoxical kind of experience when it comes to being an immigrant in a different country. I think that, a lot of people don't understand that, like even from a cultural perspective, like, you can belong to a certain specific culture because of your ethnicity in a country, but unless you've actually experienced immigration from the point of view of actually having an origin somewhere where you were consciously there, where you developed, a cultural identity, and then moving to a fully new one, I think that there is something that gets overlooked quite often, eh?
I liked what you were saying, like about, like taking a chance, and how someone had to take a chance on your dad, right? And with the Pack and Save, how that was your mum's first job and your first job, right? And the Bread Collective embodies both of those things. So it's taking a chance on people and providing them with their first job. I'm not out here trying to create 10 people who go on to be lifelong bakers. I'm here to show employers it's safe to take a chance on these people And I'm here to show these students that it's okay to have this as your first job to support your integration into New Zealand. Yeah,
because I mean, at the end of the day, none of the stuff is ever the end of the line.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's definitely a good beginning to anything.
That's it.
It don't matter whether, you actually like baking to the extent where you want to stick to it, or, maybe you'll be like, okay, cool, well, now I feel a bit more confident just being in the workforce in general.
Yeah.
Maybe I can do something else. Maybe I can try something else. I'm a bit more confident. I know how the process works. I know how to communicate to people in, in a normal work setting. You just kind of, you feel normal doing that.
Yeah.
So that's real cool. You floated an idea earlier. It was like a little bit of a controversial idea about around the world and borders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was off the record. No.
yeah. No, but I really like that. I wanna explore that a little bit. So what do you think around world and borders? Because obviously the whole refugee situation is kind of caused by
borders.
By having borders.
Borders are man-made, and we've created a refugee crisis by implementing borders and restrictions on crossing them. And that it's just something I think about often, how I guess I don't have a solution for it, but the fact that we're capable of creating such a barrier, surely we are capable of removing it as well.
Are we though?
In an ideal world.
In an ideal world, but in practice, I can see how that, that would be difficult from, well, at the very least from an economic point of view. And, when it comes to that, it seems to kind of override anything else to the point where it just, economy can literally dehumanize us.
Yes, absolutely.
Sense,
which it's done, right? It's shown us that people are not the priority, and that it's all about those resources that people are trying to protect and others are trying to gain access to. And then we have a war, and it's the people who suffer, those left in the country who have to flee. So it's just how the world has been set up, but it doesn't mean it has to continue that way. But it will take something. Even a pandemic did not shift it.
Yeah, no, I suppose because at the end of the day, I feel like the pandemic wasn't actually as catastrophic as, in that sense to affect us socially. I mean, a lot of people died, and, there was a lot of economic fallout from it all, but it's not to the extent where it kind of changed society as a whole. It wasn't some airborne virus where, you go outside and you die right away.
Yeah. And that's the thing, the people who have passed away are those who haven't had access to the help that they need, whether that be hospitalization or they haven't been able to be vaccinated. If that, I won't start that topic, not vax, but even if you weren't vaccinated, they didn't have the ability to receive help in hospital. And that's all the third world countries, right? And countries which have been destabilized by war or people trying to take resources away. So I don't know. It's all dark.
It'll take a fucking alien invasion to be fair. It'll actually take removal of current systems of power.
And the minute you have power, it's hard to let go of it.
Oh, well, you can see none of them want to let it go.
Yeah.
It's interesting actually that we're talking about this at a time when, we've got all these protests going on and a lot of political upheaval has started, not just in New Zealand, worldwide. These things have been happening for a little while now, but, now we're kind of witnessing it right in our own backyard. And I think from my point of view, what this has started is, I think we're getting to a point where people are just fed up of that approach, of this whole okay, we have the power, we're gonna fucking sink our teeth into it, we're not gonna let it go, and it's my way or the highway. And it worked for a long time. It's people weren't willing to give up certain comforts, and I mean there are still those people. there are still those people around, like, you know, you see the stuff happening on social media every other day, you know, like, God forbid you stumble on like a news hub article on Facebook and you see the kind of skirmishes that happen there, you know. So you have two opposing sides. You have one that's saying, you know, fuck it, we're sick of this, and you got the other side that's just like, everyone's an idiot, you should just be thankful for what you have, you know, the, you know, over compliant types. You know, I personally am on the other side. I'm not feeling what's going on with all this, but, you know, for the sake of just being impartial in this argument, you kind of, you know, you see more people. It's not just kind of, you know, I know they're still trying to make it seem it's just, you know, it's the fringe minorities doing this stuff, but I do feel like it's something that's starting to spread to kind of general population. And I think it's more so than just, you know, than something to do with pandemic. I think it's just the fact that everyone's sick of being told what to do all the time, and how to think and how to perceive shit, you know what I mean? Yeah.
It's hard with something where it's so new to everyone, like this pandemic. We don't have, dare I say it, it's an unprecedented time. So that's part of we don't know what we don't know, and we are being controlled.
But you know what, I think what's worse is I think we realize that we don't know, but we don't know. It's not just we don't know and they know something.
No, they don't.
They don't fucking know any better than we do. And I think this is the problem, is they're trying to tell us like we're like, you know, like we're meant to listen to that. Like they do, we don't. And I think people are starting to kind of feel, I mean, I hate the fucking term, but it's almost like they're being, you know, the whole gaslighting thing. Like they're starting to feel gaslit. In that sense, where everyone's just always telling you this is how it is, this is what needs to be done, comply, do this, it's going to work. And people are like, well, what the fuck is this doing? It's not really helping anything, is it? All it's doing so far, all we've seen is it's done a whole lot of damage to the living standard, it's done damage to the economy, it's done damage to you know, people's livelihoods. You know, like there's a lot of businesses that went under, people lost jobs, etc. Our rates of suicide, again, you know, like our rates of suicide, mental health's on the decline, family violence is an all-time high. There was actually something that I talked about on one of the previous episodes with a criminal lawyer. So, you know, like she reinforced that saying as well. There's just, you know, there's a lot of incidents of family crime, family violence right now. And yeah, I think this is kind of where everyone's starting to link it to that. While they're attempting to tell us it's like, no, everything's cool, everything's all right. You know,
Do you think that the government did the best job they could, though?
You know, I mean, like in terms of this whole thing, right? I'm going to use some boxing analogy here, but if you have if your first 2 rounds are good, but if you fuck up for the next 10, you're still losing the fight. So I'm, you know, like you got to be fair where you got to be fair. When this whole thing started back in March of 2020, we did a really good job with what we knew at the time. You know, and you can't take that away. I know some people just kind of, you know, they overcommit to a certain point of view. You can't take that away. At that time, we actually did well compared to how a lot of the rest of the world handled it. I was like, when this whole thing actually kicked off, I was in New York. I was in the States at the time. So that was total chaos, and I got to witness that. You know, I was on ground zero of apocalypse. I saw Times Square with nobody in it. You know, so like to me that was like a historical moment that I lived through.
For sure.
So, you know, like in that sense, and you know what was going on with, you know, there wasn't enough of those, what do you call them, ventilators or whatever. So, you know, they were literally, it was coming down to these, you know, utilitarian approaches of well, you know, we got a young guy and an old guy. We only got one ventilator. Who gets to live? You know, so it was those kind of choices that we're beginning to make. And I saw the refrigerator containers up in Brooklyn, you know, when people started dying at such rates that there wasn't enough morgue space.
Wow.
So, you know, like you were walking past a container full of dead people on the street.
Right.
You know, so like you felt how chaotic everywhere else was. And when I came back here, I was like, oh, well, okay, we just went into lockdown at the time. You know, obviously it was something very weird and new to us. But, you know, I didn't mind it too much. It actually kind of like, it allowed me to reset. And at the time I was like, okay, cool. We'll come back from this. Everything's going to be cool. But moving forward from that, I do feel like it wasn't managed well. It was okay, what do I do? Okay, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to listen to anyone anymore.
But arguably, no country got it right.
No country did get it right, but I think at a certain point you do also have to start paying attention to, you know, to the other factors. I think we didn't have a holistic approach to dealing with a pandemic. It's like, cool, yeah, you don't want people to die from the disease, but you also don't want people to fucking go homeless and start abusing substances. All of these things, you know, because it has a social fallout. And in my opinion, up to this point, I think the social fallout has actually been much worse than that of the pandemic itself. You know, like if you look at, you know, you can go deeper into the stats, but even I'm pretty sure they will tell you that as well. You know, like there's a lot of that going around, you know, as to, you know, the rate of suicide versus the mortality with COVID. So, you know, in terms of that, you have to pay attention to that. And we didn't. And now people are angry and still nobody wants to listen. So I think this is where the problem lies.
It's really hard to know how to shift a government's approach. You know, the riots, I don't know if they will be successful. Do you know, like, it's hard to know without completely, you know, causing a huge problem in New Zealand. It's hard to know.
You'd hope that the riots would be an indicator. See, that's the thing. I think this is the worst thing about it, is they're still trying to minimize and kind of downplay it. It's just fringe minorities, people, you know, consuming garbage, misinformation, you know, when reality is like, it's not misinformation if you don't have the correct information. It's a bunch of bullshit. Everything is based on kind of like, oh, well, you know, this is likely to do this is likely to do that. I mean, I'm not going to go into the medical aspects of things, but again, you know, you're looking at the medical implications versus the social. And, you know, people are angry. It is evident that a lot of them don't know what they're angry about. There's definitely a disconnect as to what people are writing about right now. They're, you know, all sorts of different viewpoints showed up. There's no, you know, single agenda. There's no leadership around that. It's just a bunch of angry people that showed up and started rioting. And from that point of view, it's hard to see anything kind of being achieved from there because you don't really know what you're doing. But from the point of view of the government, you really should be seeing that this is still happening outside. So obviously you're fucking up. You're doing something wrong. And this is what I think they're refusing to see.
I guess, it's really hard to know without working. I don't know how they get feedback from us, except for, like, you know, when you can comment on a bill or something. I don't know if we're being heard, and therefore I don't know if it's worth rioting, or
I think it's
because
just
it's so much pressure and stress on the individual.
It's getting to the point where rioting is kind of, you know, that's your only choice. Because there's been a lot of discontent. There's been a lot of, you know, like, what else you're gonna do? You're gonna go talk shit on Facebook. You know, that's been going on for a little while, but that's like, okay, you're just some, you know, fringe extremist groups on social media. You know, nobody cares about you. Then it kind of goes into, you know, the next step of where, you know, Prime Minister was touring around the country, and there were mini protests at just about everywhere she went, and it was just always like, it's just part of the job, all these weirdos, I don't pay attention to them. Now it's kind of like, well, how many of us have to come together for you to listen? Like, I mean, like that, I think that's the worst thing. It's just this, you know, it's this refusal to confront that this is happening. It doesn't matter whether you consider it big or not, it's still a problem. You know, you can't ignore it. You're going to end up in trouble. So this is what I find quite ridiculous about this current situation.
It's hard to know how to be heard on this level. It will take maybe, like you were saying, it's a bit everyone for themselves coming together, but there's no leader. Maybe it's about someone coming up with a constructive way, someone that the government will listen to more seriously.
And I think what it also shows us is, like, the unfortunate fact that on the other side of this, there isn't necessarily a solution to that because there is no leader. because nobody's actually come and said, well, look, maybe you need to listen to these guys.
Yeah, no one whom the
Everyone's
government will listen to,
Yeah, I mean, like, it's cool, like, if you don't want to listen to a bunch of people sitting on your front lawn, okay, but at the same time, nobody came and said, okay, let's have a listen. Let's see what the frustration is. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
So in terms of that, I mean, like, the only person I've heard say anything was the old party leader for ACT, Rodney Hyde. I mean, that guy's been out of the game for a while. We've forgotten who he was, and he came out and said, well, look, the current guy, what's his name, David Seymour, like, you that was your opportunity, like, even from a political point of view. Let's just kind of, let's make it real petty like that.
Yeah.
But still, like, that was your chance to say, okay, cool, let's listen to that. But literally everybody's just in there. It's like, nah, we're going to be, we're going to talk shit amongst ourselves. We're going to poke holes in everybody's policies and say, you're wrong, now you're wrong. But it's still, all these political intrigues don't seem to involve people at any point. Nobody's listening to the people, and this is why they're frustrated.
Yeah, I feel like if they could have just heard what the people had to say in a constructive way, if they could have set up a organized way to do that, that would be really powerful for New Zealand. And I think maybe that's the next step.
But I think, from the point of view of, the current Prime Minister's leadership style, especially how it started off, at the beginning of her career as a Prime Minister, I feel like it's just changed tune. It's almost uncharacteristic, because at the time she was all about people. She wanted to get involved in, let's make sure everybody's doing okay, and I mean, it did still ruffle some feathers in the business world, but, it is what it is. We're past that now. But at this point, it's literally just like, nah, like, this is my way or the highway. And this is what I find, like, quite confusing about it. It's just like, at no point, none of this is ever addressed. You don't have to kind of address every single thing, because literally there are people protesting about, like, a whole long ass list of shit over there right now. But at least a common denominator amongst all of that, and that common denominator is the same still. Everybody still showed up at the root of it for the same reason.
That's right.
So at least in that sense, I feel like that could have been addressed.
One thing to remember though is Jacinda has a whole group of people that dictate what goes on.
And I feel like she's not listening to them anymore either.
I don't think it's like a dictatorship, or I don't think she makes the calls on anything though. But also it's important to remember she is just a human being, with, not to take away from how she's led New Zealand, but she is just a person, right? And she's also going through these times, and no other prime minister has had to deal with this, and she's also got a toddler at home, like all of these things.
You see, this is where, this is why I can't go with the whole, humanistic kind of approach in this, because the stakes are too high. If you can't stand the heat, get out the kitchen. Let someone else do the job. If you're stressed out, if you can't handle it no more, step down.
But those, to use your analogy, those first 2 rounds were still important to the overall boxing match.
But we're getting to the point where, we're in the later rounds and we've lost a few. I mean, are you going to go to the bitter end and, cause more damage? Or are you going to,
and that's what, I guess, what we're going to find out this year, how it's going to be handled.
Because
it changes. The good thing is it's never set in stone. It's good and bad, because it means we're constantly changing, but at least constant changes change. So as long as we constantly keep changing and improving, at least it's not one and done, like that the final decision. Maybe the October date will be brought forward for people allowed to come in that aren't citizens and residents.
In terms of
it
that,
is
like,
constantly
it's
changing.
Going back to what I was saying before, because there's no leadership around this, the main concern now is that what's next? It's like, okay, cool, we can, she can get voted out, she can step down, whatever, she can leave, but what's next? Who's going to take up the reins, and are they going to be that much better?
Is anyone capable of leading us?
That's what
right
I mean.
Now?
It's just like, I feel like at this point, there's not much to choose from, and I think that happens to be the issue in many countries. I mean, you've seen this happening everywhere. I mean, United States is a pretty good example too. I mean, like everybody was like, oh, Trump this, Trump that. Okay, cool, you got Trump out, but did you really want Biden? I don't know. Like this guy's just, I don't know. Like I'm not even really paying attention to what he's saying anymore because he doesn't know where he is half the time. But like there was something about him trying to give out crack pipes to address racial inequity or something like that the other day. And I'm not bullshitting. I'm not like making this up as some like Instagram meme. Like this was actually on the news, and I'm just like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
So, like as people the world over, I feel like we're just really having to choose a shit sandwich with different amount of shit in it,
I feel like people capable of truly good leadership don't often take up those positions because they understand the weight of it. So we probably have exceptional leaders amongst us, but they are so worried about taking on that responsibility that they don't go for the roles of prime minister.
I disagree with that. I feel like they usually don't have the opportunity to do that. You got to understand.
Sure, maybe it's both.
Not everyone can enter politics. Like this isn't an easy thing to just kind of put your hand up for your head in the ring. You got to go through all these different levels of these vultures that just want to be in there, because there's all these political, career politicians that just refuse to leave.
Yeah.
And, like it's not an infinite amount of space. Somebody has to go before someone has to come in. So in terms of that, there's a lot of people that just they are more concerned with having the job than doing the job. And I think that's, like, especially right now, that's one of the big problems. That's why we're not getting anybody new and innovative and willing to take, a certain amount of risk. Any change, implies that. And I think in that sense, this is where we're kind of stuck a little bit right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel like that.
Because, who's going to pay your way in? All these guys are for, everybody's giving them out all these donations for them to run their campaigns, but somebody who's truly good but with no connections, how are they going to get in? It's just how the world works. Your ideas can be as good as anything. It can be the best ideas in the world, but unless you're kind of able to financially
and have the opportunity
it's it's a hard thing to do.
So I guess all we can do to tie it right back to the start is pay attention to the present moment and control what we can control, and choose how we react to a situation. In
terms of that, I really do hope that we can kind of seize this moment without having too many fights on the lawn of the beehive. Because I mean that shit just looks ugly, man.
But like with all these exceptional leaders that are out there, I guess we should encourage them to lead small pockets of people through this. So whether you're a manager in your workplace, managing 3 or 4 people, you can take that opportunity to help people through this time as well.
And support those people too. So if you're not going to step up, you're not going to step up to be the leader, at least support the guy that you see trying. Don't just cut him down and say, who put you in charge? Fuck, you're not happy with the ones that are. At least he's trying. Give him some backing. Show that even if you don't, if you're not in position to kind of throw any money behind him, which a lot of us aren't, but at least throw a bit of support, a bit of encouragement and faith into them. And that way, you can do something new, something different. Because otherwise, it's just same old shit. It's funded by the same money, and we end up in the same position with the same problems and the same complaints.
So, control what you can, and that's your immediate environment, and help those around you as best as you can. And maybe through those small acts, we might enact a bigger change, right?
I want you to plug your organization real quick. You got an Instagram, right?
So check us out, thebreadcollective.nz on Instagram, and just keep up to date with us. We're growing, we're new, but I encourage you to support us and support the students as they start their journey in New Zealand.
See, we need more of that kind of stuff. We need less of that bullshit. We need less fighting. We need more positive things.
We need more bread.
We definitely need more bread too. Everything getting expensive out here, and we're hungry. All right, I appreciate you coming through.
Thanks so much for having me.
It was really nice to chat with you.
It was awesome.